Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking there, fielding questions from reporters. We're going to cross straight to Jerusalem and debrief on what Netanyahu had to say with Noga Tarnopolsky, our correspondent there. Noga, Netanyahu very much lauding the US and Israel's alleged achievements so far in this war, saying that we are winning and Iran is being decimated.
Yes, but he said quite a bit more tonight. It was really fascinating to see him. I think we should first note that Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't exposed himself in this way to the press in several years. So it was very interesting to observe. But this appears to be a press conference organized at the last minute with an audience of one. This was the English part of this press conference was directed, I would say, like an arrow at Donald Trump himself. And we had a peek at some of, I think we had a behind the scenes peek at some of the discussions that these two leaders must have had over the last few months, and at the manner in which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu framed this Iran situation for Donald Trump. So that was fascinating to see. The other thing that was very interesting was to see Prime Minister Netanyahu a little bit as a man on a tightrope, very exposed. He has built his entire career, more than 30 years in public service, on the Iran issue. And he is not asked, even tonight, I have to say, he was not asked, how can it be, with all of his years in power, that Iran every year has become a greater threat to Israel on his own terms, as he describes it, despite what he says are decades of effort. And what we know is almost a career-long fixation of Prime Minister Netanyahu on Iran. So it was very interesting to see him today, on the one side, kind of bat away the accusations that Israel drew President Trump into this. On the other hand, bat away the opposite questions, which is that only the United States is really leading this war and that Israel will do whatever Donald Trump tells it to do. It was interesting to hear him quote Churchill, his hero, who he loves to compare himself to, and other American figures. You could really hear a man trying to defend his entire worldview, a fairly dark worldview, possibly justified in some respects, but with a very unclear, in the real world now, this worldview is leading Israel to a very unclear outcome in terms of its own security, even in terms of its alliance with the United States. It is evident that Prime Minister Netanyahu is concerned about the opposition in the United States to this war. He was very careful when he talked about President Trump's followers backing this war. He's referring to, I think, the CNN poll that came out earlier today showing that MAGA, people who self-identify as MAGA, support this war. But if you look at statistics of the United States, including people who identify as conservative, there is widespread opposition. There's also widespread skepticism in Congress. And Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly was trying to rise to the balustrades and explain his vision and why this is an all-important battle, a sort of high noon. He went into some disquisitions about what leadership is, really justifying and almost, I would say, denigrating every other Western leader other than Donald Trump. Not to mention, of course, the Iranian leadership, who he couldn't stop referring to as lunatics, barbarians, and other epithets.
We really saw Netanyahu very much, lauding the United States, saying he's fighting the war with America. Israel is fighting the war with America, and not, America is not fighting for Israel. It is fighting with Israel, he said. We got that confirmation that Israel did in fact act alone when it hit the South Pars gas field. That move very much counter to Washington's desire to keep oil prices down. Are we seeing cracks there between the US and Israel?
Clearly seeing cracks. In fact, today, twice, once in a press conference alongside the Japanese Prime Minister, and once in a pretty angry Truth Social post, twice, Donald Trump said that Israel acted alone and against his instructions. Now, the Israeli army has been briefing since yesterday and today on the record that everything was, including this strike on the oil field, which is shared by Qatar and Iran, incidentally, really complicating matters. The Israeli army says it was 100% coordinated. The way this conundrum is being interpreted in Israeli media is quite interesting. And it is that apparently, say many Israeli media, that the problem in communication is not between Israel and the United States or the Israeli army and the US army. The problem is between the US army and the US executive, US leadership back in Washington, because Israel clearly shared everything. And so there must be that problem of communication. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I have to say, almost completely deflected this question. He was asked more than once. He didn't like the question. It was the only question about which his answers tended to be brief. And what he said three things. One is he didn't answer the direct question, did Donald Trump personally authorize this strike? This leads me to think that whatever levels of coordination did take place before this strike, which may end up being a turning point in the war, these were military coordinations and not at the level of the prime minister and the president. Secondly, he said something that is not going to play well at all in Israel. He said Donald Trump is the leader. Israel is the ally. For an Israel that has been told by Prime Minister Netanyahu for going on 3 decades that Iran is an existential threat, for a prime minister who just a few months ago told Israelis they had to go it alone in the world, that he would turn Israel into, I'm quoting, a super Sparta. This is going to hit pretty hard because, again, a nationalist right-wing prime minister just said out loud in front of us live on TV that he's not leading this war, that he's not leading the de facto effort to save Israel from nuclear and ballistic threats out of Iran. And finally, yes, Netanyahu again emphasized the nature of his close relationship with Trump, but much more so, he really showed us, I believe, the way he has framed this entire argument for the United States, for members of Congress, and in particular in this last year for Donald Trump. And I think, you know, without really stepping into this minefield of false media and memes about who's leading whom, I do think we have to say Netanyahu is particularly well poised just by his own character, his personal style. Netanyahu loves pithy slogans. He always has. He loves grand historical sweeps. He mentioned with anger that this was another moment in which the world had to prevent a Holocaust, really almost screaming at that point at the journalists as if, what, have we learned nothing? He said. So he has a wide sweep of things. And I think that Netanyahu's manner of conceiving of himself as a leader and of Israel's fronts is simply a manner of speaking that does speak very directly to Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump likes the slogans, likes to be brought into a wide historic sweep of leadership, likes to be thought of as someone who could prevent a Holocaust. And so I think what we're seeing, more than any of the bizarre conspiracies on all sides that we've been hearing, we're seeing two leaders who are now together in this ship of war. And I think both could win a lot, but both clearly could lose a lot. And this press conference tonight, a really fascinating press conference, shows us that Netanyahu, at least as of today, is aware that this war is not going as he wished, at least in terms of the public narrative in the United States. And without the United States, right now, Israel has no other ally.
Noga, we're going to have to leave it there. Noga Tarnopolsky, thank you so much for that breakdown, as always. Noga Tarnopolsky, our correspondent in Jerusalem, there with me.